demonstrations such as we had yesterday in Washington?
Well, you know, I get a lot of demonstrations in Singapore, and my students are quite a rambunctious and spirited lot. And I think they ought to be. Otherwise, I think there's very little future for Singapore. It's a young community, and the young must be idealistic. The young must believe that the world should be more just, and there should be more moral rectitude in the behavior of their leaders, and they protest often in more than just a peaceful manner, because the communists slip into my demonstrations and, you know, windows got broken so often and cars get overturned. But at the end of the day, I think decisions have got to be made by adults, not teenagers. But it's got to be made in such a way that when the teenagers become adults and they look back on these decisions, they would be proud of the generation that went before them.
Well, let me ask you this, Prime Minister. How confident are you that the United States will continue to supply this underpinning which you consider to be necessary for the non-communist states in Asia over, say, the next decade or so?
I don't know, and I don't think, first of all, I'm not an American, so how can I know? And this is one of the reasons I've come here, to try and get a sample of the thinking, the feeling. I have no doubts that your president has got resolution and determination and restraint, and somebody will probably work out a winning line. But I've also no doubt that your Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense have got it. But what I think, in your kind of open democratic society, you must demonstrate, in which I've really come here to try and understand better, to watch the proceedings in your presidential elections next year, is whether you, as a people, have got that resolution, that stamina, that perseverance, and, most important of all, infinite patience and a capacity to hold back your desire to settle this quickly and get it over with, because this is a very different kind of war. The other side is not in uniform, you are.
Do you believe that SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, in its present framework, provides an adequate guarantee to Southeast Asian security?
Well, you know, when it happened in, I think, 1954, 55, Mr. Nehru and quite a few other leaders like President Sukarno were very vehement in their denunciation, and even the Tunku Abdul Rahman of Malaysia was critical, and so was I. And I think looking back now, it really didn't meet the situation, because it was so very different from what you did for Europe. You know, in SEATO, when an attack takes place on a member country, is just an attack against a member, and the others will take note that this is a breach of peace and a danger to the area. But in NATO, when an attack takes place, an attack on one is an attack on all, and they all respond. And you know what's happened. I mean, who has responded in South Vietnam? The Pakistanis have not, the French have not, the British have not, and probably for very good reasons. And until you convince Asia that you consider Asia as important to you, as Americans, as Europe was to America, you're going to find a lot of Asians like me rather critical and really doubting, because 90% of you have come from Europe. You understand Europe better than you understand Asia. Some of you understand Asia very well because you make specialized studies of the subject. But as a people, and finally, it is the mothers and fathers watching this television screen and seeing what is happening to their sons, and all the sweethearts also watching this, that will decide. And if you want people to take a stand, you've got to demonstrate that as a people you've got what it takes, that Asia does matter to you.
Ms.
And
Frederick.
does matter to the free world.
Excuse me, Ms. Frederick.
As you call it.
Mr. Prime Minister, in answer to one of my questions, I believe you said, and I hope I'm quoting you correctly, In the name of humanity, great care should be taken that there be no reaction by the Russians and the Chinese. They must react. Would you tell us under what conditions you feel the Russians and the Chinese might react to what is going on in Vietnam, and whether there is any possibility of it now as you see the picture?
I think really you ought to put that question to Mr. Khrushchev, Mr. Brezhnev and Mr. Kosygin, and probably Mr. Mao Zedong and Marshal Lin Piao or Zhou Enlai. I really can't answer this, but I'm quite certain that at some point they will decide that their own national interests are at stake and they must respond.
Excuse me, gentlemen, Miss Frederick, we have a little more than 3 minutes left. Mr. Evans.
Mr. Prime Minister, you made it clear that you are concerned about the resolution, particularly beyond the '68 election and into the future of the U.S. in Vietnam and in all of Asia, that our interest is stable and long-term. Would it not help resolve that difficulty, as you see it, if your country put a small token force? You only have 2 million in your population, I understand, but if you put a small token force into the field to assist in the work that is being done over there against what we call aggression from the North, wouldn't that help the United States to resolve this issue?
I don't see it as my duty as the Prime Minister, an elected Prime Minister of Singapore, and not a client state of the United States. I'm not in receipt of your aid, nor am I here to seek aid. I'm doing all right. I hope to do more trade with you. And I don't think it is the duty of the elected representative, leader of Singapore, to go and involve his country in a situation which can end disastrously for his whole people. And as I've said, if there is no resolution shown, and God knows what can happen between now and November 1968, you tell me what happens to all your allies who have gone in with you in South Vietnam.
Mr. Topping.
Well, in connection with what you've just said, I remember once you said, in fact, I believe you said it to me, when we were talking about your neutrality, you said, I am not neutral where the survival of my people are concerned. Now, if your survival does depend upon how well the United States and the South Vietnamese are able to do in Vietnam, in the sense of containing the Asian communists, don't you think you should help more directly?
I think my survival is not threatened yet. I've got my British friends and my Commonwealth friends in the area up till the middle 70s, and that's a very long time in the history of Southeast Asia. But, of course, it could change fundamentally by decisions you can make in South Vietnam between now and '68 and '69. And as the situation changes, we shall be watching it most intensely and avidly. And we shall make contingency plans. We have to.
We have about 1 minute left, Mr. Noyes.
Prime Minister, if, as you said, the treaty, the SEATO treaty, were strengthened to be more like NATO, with the same guarantees that NATO provides, would your country adhere to such a treaty?
I think eventually what we must try and create in South and Southeast Asia is a community that is economically and socially conscious of what is to be gained by gearing into each other, yeasting up the economy, and once that happens, I think the security aspect, mutual security interest should lead us to a NATO-type situation, perhaps, with a minimum of underpinning from outside. And if we can have a multilateral underpinning, you know, America, Russia, and most important, China too, saying, yes, there shall be no aggression in South and Southeast Asia, and boundaries shall not be changed by force. I think we got a peaceful world, much more peaceful world.
I must interrupt you there. Our time is up. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for being with us today on Meet the Press. I'll be back with you in just a minute after this message.
For a printed copy of today's interview, send 10 cents in coin and a stamped self-addressed envelope to Merkel Press, Box 2111, Washington, D.C. 20013.
Next week on Meet the Press, our guest will be another headline figure in the news. Now, this is Edwin Newman saying goodbye for the Prime Minister of Singapore and Meet the Press.
Goodbye.
Join us each Sunday for News in the Making on Meet the Press, America's press conference of the air. Today's edition of Meet the Press was brought to you by Fireman's Fund American Insurance Companies.